Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coffee Chat sponsored by the SA Property Investors Network. For those of you who are regular, I know you're kind of shocked as to what is happening. We'll currently have something brewing for a year end and a fresh new look for the Coffee Chat. So right now we are in between studios. You know how somebody's low-key homeless and they say that I'm in between places? That is us right now, and that's why I am chatting to you from this location instead of our regular studios. However, for those of you who it's your first time watching us, you would not be shocked because you don't know that we have really nice couches. However, as always, this is what we do. So if you don't know who we are the SA Property Investors Network. That's the South Africa's Properties Investors Network. And what we do is simple. We teach, we learn, we grow. And our aim is to be a network of like-minded individuals that either help you start or grow your property journey. It really is that simple. We strive to have each and every single one of you either start your property journey or expand it in different ways. And as always, I'm going to be starting with the events. And these are some of the ways that we help you expand or start your property journey. Now, we have a lot. We have a lot in November. It's that last kick of the final horse in terms of events. It's November, it's the last ones, we're banging them out, and so we're just going to be starting off in terms of the events that we are currently having. The ones that I'm super excited about is tomorrow's event, which is our last public event, and it is partnered with ABSA, and we are going to be discussing how to unlock finance. So if you have not gotten your tickets, please get them. The link will be in the chat box. And that's for #AskAbsa. So I cannot wait to see you there. But let's get it over and done with. Like I said, on the 7th of November, on Tuesday, that's going to be at the Bryson Country Club. It's our last public event. And this is how to unlock your finance and get more deals with ABSA. Then we have a coaching and legal support webinar. That's for all of our foundation, intermediate, or professional members. That's going to be happening on the 9th of November. So please register. The link will be in the chat box. And we have something super amazing. It's called the Investor Deal Night. And that's when we pitch out deals to potential investors. So if you don't have the time, but you do have the capacity or you do have the financing or the equity to take on more deals, but you just don't have the time to look for it, we will actually be pitching deals to investors. And these are investor-specific deals. So because we understand, typically what you guys would be looking for in terms of return on investment, the yields, all of that, that's going to be happening on the 14th of November, right here at head offices in Edenvale. Next, we have the mastermind, and this is only for professional members, and that's happening on the 30th of November at 6 o'clock. And we're going to be having a free event, and that's essentially how to unlock your finance. That's going to be happening on Thursday, on the 16th of November. So if you cannot make it, please make sure that you register for the one that's happening in Edenvale, and that's how you unlock your finance. Those are some of the events that we are going to be having in the next coming week, in a couple of days. But as always on the Coffee Chat, I will keep you posted with all the other events, because trust me, it is jam-packed in terms of the things we're going to be doing. However, what we discuss today is how to live for free. Who wants to live for free? Just let me know in the chat box. Literally, if you want to live for free, let me know in the chat box, because I know I want to live for free. However, it's not that simple. It is a little bit more complex, and what we mean by living for free is using your properties to fund your life. Now, we have an expert in student accommodation and Airbnb, and this lady has an entire portfolio where it just runs itself, and she's going to be letting us know about her experiences, and that's Julia Haddon. So we're going to be chatting to her in a little bit, but we're going to be discussing how to live for free, and this is especially for youth members, and that youth event is going to be happening next week. So because we know sometimes finance is an issue, how do you unlock different possibilities and opportunities in your current property in order for it to start funding itself? So ladies and gentlemen, please just help me welcome and give a roaring applause for Julia Haddon. How are you?
Hi, afternoon. I'm very, very well, thank you. And how are you?
I am great, Julia. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so you have the ins and outs and the secrets of how to live for free.
I do indeed have the experience. Would you like me to share my story with you?
Yes, but before we do that, I just want to urge everybody, as always, please put your questions in the chat box. As I said, Julia is an expert in student accommodation and Airbnb. So we're going to be having a nice chat with her. So any questions you might have in terms of, unlocking the potential in your properties, please put those in the chat box and we will make sure to get Julia to ask them. However, as always, we've had people who've asked previously on the last coffee chat for questions for this week. And we're going to be just unpacking a few things while we're waiting for the questions. So Julia, first and foremost, I'm very envious that you just get to live for free. It's pretty awesome. But I think the one thing that people want to know is, it's always the how. Like, how and when did your journey start?
All right. So I am a graphic designer by training, and up until about 2020, I was doing graphic designing, and I've been doing it for 20 years, but I wasn't happy doing that. And I always had a love of property, so I decided to change direction quite radically and upskill myself and start off my property investing journey, which I did do. So I actually started off in the student accommodation side of things. My very first deal was a student accommodation house, and that one I bought towards the end of 2020. I've still got that house. It's still going really, really well. And then, I started following Sapin, and I saw some of the adverts of the Robin Booth course, the Airbnb course, and I just loved the concept of firstly the house hacking strategy on Airbnb, as well as the rent to rent strategy on Airbnb, because I was looking for a cash flow strategy, just to boost my cash flows, and that seemed like the perfect fit. So I actually had a little studio on my property, and it just needed a little bit more work to actually make it Airbnb ready. So I decided to do that, but obviously before I did that, I upskilled myself. So that is quite key. You need the education behind you so that it's a success. And I did that course. It was the Robin Booth course. I believe you resell it as well. And it's quite an intensive course, but it literally has your A to Z of everything you will need to be a successful Airbnb host, and other tips and tricks and tools, and goodness, it's a minefield of information. So I did that all, and then finally I launched that little studio apartment that I had on my own property. I got it all ready, and I launched it at the end of 2021. I was flabbergasted at the market's reaction to it, and the occupation rate is brilliant, as well as my rates. So it continues to this day, and it's doing really, really well. And that particular apartment is bringing in about 10 to 15,000 rand a month, just that little one. It's literally, I've decorated it tastefully, but it's literally a bedroom. It doesn't have a lounge, and it's got a little bathroom. It's a nicely done bathroom. I've got a bit of a flair for interior design, so I like to make things look nice. And of course, in the Robin Booth course, it shows you how to make things incredibly comfortable for your guests as well as being very sort of clear and informative in terms of your communication and all of that. So that one does really well. And after that, I thought, well, I've got this terrible derelict other room with a sort of makeshift kitchen and toilet area, a really revolting space that was never done nicely from scratch. From day one, it was the floors, the the screed that they put on the floors, the concrete that they put on the floors was literally disintegrating in your hands. That's how bad it was. It was used as a domestic quarters. So based on the success on the first one, I wasted absolutely no time. So December of 2021, I got cracking with renovating that unit. That unit, I literally knocked down walls, rethought that entire space. And then I made a beautiful little private garden for it. That one consists of a fairly small bedroom, open plan bedroom. These apartments are about sort of 25 to 27 square meters, so we're not talking a big space here. But there are clever ways in which you can actually utilize space. So I put in a little kitchenette into that one. The other one didn't have the kitchenette. The bathroom was, I mean, if you know those old domestic quarters, I mean, it's really basic. Had a little toilet and a tiny little shower around the corner. So I made it a sort of like a walk-in shower. But this one, because of the fact that it was such a tiny little bathroom, I spent money on imported Portuguese tiles, and so it looks stunning, and it doesn't feel like you're in a cramped space, because it's actually the finishes and the textures and all of that actually make it feel quite luxurious. So then I launched that one, and that one's equally, if not more, successful. That one's got a certain charm about it. But anyway, so I launched that one in about March 2022. And that is still going. It's still successful. And that one's doing about the same, just slightly more than the other one, because I charge slightly more for this one. So between the two of them, I'm making, if you take all your costs off, I'm making between 20 to 25,000 Rand from those two little studios, which is basically equal to our bond that we took out on our main house. So it's a great little cash cow, and it was sitting right in front of my nose.
Yeah. So Julia, you mentioned something that I would love to piggyback off of, and that's, there was another question was like, is there something specific that I need to do, right? The first thing we can agree on is you need to actually get the education. You can try and do this up by yourself. That's on you, but you're probably going to make a lot of mistakes that you could avoid if you had the course, and the course is in the link. However, you mentioned that, you had imported Portuguese styles. Would you say people need to start off that grandiose, or for the most part, there's just these little things, let's say 3 things, that if you want to rent out your cottage to Airbnb, for example, what would you say those are? Because I don't think everybody has the capacity to go as lavish at the initial starting point.
Yeah, look, that one I did spend a bit on that bathroom because it was so small, but because it was small, it also wasn't totally breaking the bank, but one doesn't need to do that. Guests just like you to take care of the details. Obviously, the more attractive the space is, the better. I mean, one can't argue with that, but you need to understand the guests' needs. You need to make it easy for them to check in, to check out. There's certain things that just are non-negotiable. The check-ins and the check-outs are one of those things. You need to have proper linen. You need to communicate well with your guests. There's those sorts of details that you will learn when you do a course. And it's very important to actually, once you've launched, to get things right, because those guests, if you're going to put your listing on Airbnb, they are going to leave a review for you. And if you get good reviews, you'll get more people coming in to stay at your place. So it's important to get those basics right. And there are actually a lot of small details you can actually put into your apartment to make the whole entire experience a good and a pleasant one. The other thing that is very critical with an Airbnb is how clean it is. I would say that's one of the most critical things that has to be done right. So one has to get that side of it correct. It's very, very important to guests, obviously.
Okay, and you also mentioned that you do have like genuine knowledge in Airbnb, but you also did student accommodation, and we could argue those two, outside of like something as big as developments, are the biggest ones that have the highest level of remuneration out of all of the property strategies. So multi-lets bring in a good income, so do buy-to-lets and stuff, but they're a little bit more lower risk. Whereas Airbnbs tend to be a bit of a higher risk, but there's also like a higher reward. So can you just help us understand in terms of student accommodation, how you got into that, and how is that journey going?
Okay, so when I started off my doing property investing, I mentored with a company, and they actually specialized in student accommodation. So it was sort of natural that I should follow on from that, and actually, because I learned so much about it and I got the training, it was kind of the obvious next step for me. So I purchased a student accommodation house. I did all the research and everything. And I did the deal. The student accommodation house that I purchased was already, the actual house was already sort of subdivided into all the different rooms. It was already running as a student accommodation. However, it was in the middle of COVID. So there were only like, 7 students in there. And we didn't know what was going to happen the next year with COVID, but I firmly believed that students would come back to the varsities. There were no leases in place. It wasn't being managed all that well. The caretaker that was there was living in shocking conditions. So I did quite a lot of work on that. And again, I had a mentor that helped me to actually set up processes and set up the management of the student house, because the deal is only part of student accommodation. Thereafter, the management of that student accommodation becomes critical. You get to learn a different skill set. You're going to probably have to deal with evictions, that type of thing. But it's going really well. I've still got that house. It's absolutely full to the brim. There's still a lot of demand. Yes, I have learned a lot from that as well. There are some sort of I would say Airbnb and student accommodation overlaps in that in those two strategies you are dealing with people, and people come with sort of different, there's certain skills that you need to employ to deal with people, as we know. So that one, that student accommodation is doing really well, and I'm really happy with it. And the nice thing about that, I'm acquiring the assets as well. So not only am I making a profit on that, but I'm also acquiring that house.
Yes. Pardon the interruption, that with the student accommodation, you are acquiring the assets. But the beauty with Airbnb is that you don't always have to own the asset, right? And as we know, sometimes the initial, bond approval or the initial cash injection oftentimes is the hindrance for people starting out. And the beauty with Airbnb is that oftentimes you don't need as large of an amount initially as you would with all the other strategies that come with it, and henceforth live for free. So with that, let's argue it's something similar to your space, where it is a unit, that is in a cottage or something that's already there, so that there isn't a lot of work because you already own the asset. But what do you have to say for people who are like, okay, I would like to start an Airbnb? How do I go about it? Like, how do I go and communicate with a landlord that I would like to sublet their properties? And this is just before we go to the chat box. So I see you guys already asking questions. So please put all of your questions that you have for Julia in the chat box, and any inquiries you might have on how to live for free. But Julia, as I was saying, what advice would you give in terms of somebody who doesn't own the assets or doesn't have the capacity to own the asset?
All right. So your Airbnb rent-to-rent strategy is a good one to start off with if you don't have the asset, or even if you have a bad credit record. It's possible to actually do a deal on that. The rent-to-rent strategy is where you will approach a landlord who wants to rent out their property or apartment, and you will ask to rent it on a long-term basis, and then you will then sublet it out on like the Airbnb platform. You pay the landlord his monthly rent and probably electricity and water and things like that. And then at the end of the day, you take the profits, you get the income from Airbnb, and you take the profits over and above that rental amount that you're paying the landlord. So that's a really, really good one. And I have, since my two, let's call them the house hacking apartments on my property, I have gone on to do 4 rent-to-rent properties in Cape Town.
Wow, that is amazing. So we're gonna get into the questions. So this one is essentially a 2-part question from Samkelo, and he would like to know. The first one is, how hands-on should you be on both of these strategies? So like we said, each one comes with its pros and cons. For example, a buy-to-let, for the most part, you don't really need to be that hands-on. It's one tenant or one family, and that's it. Whereas Airbnb or student accommodation, the story is a bit different. So the first part of that is, how hands-on should you be on both these strategies?
Okay, so to begin with, both on the student accommodation and on the Airbnb strategy, you are going to be quite hands-on initially, very hands-on. But there are strategies and processes that you can put in place to minimize the amount of time it takes for you to organize things. Airbnb, there's a lot of comings and goings, less so than student accommodation. Student accommodation, you're looking at more of a sort of a long-term lease where the person's in there, they're not coming and going. You have to check up once in a while, but once the initial setup is done, it's fairly passive. It's not bad at all, which is what I love about the student accommodation. Airbnb can be a little bit more intense with guest communication. A lot of that communication with the guests, you can actually, do your automated messaging. So you will compile messages, save them on the Airbnb platform, and the Airbnb platform will then automatically send messages to your guests of how to check in, all of that sort of communication. So that takes a bit away from it. But yeah, I would say it's easier to set up like an Airbnb or a rent-to-rent Airbnb apartment, but there's more time spent on the messaging with the guests and coordination with the cleaners and all of that. But there are ways in which you can minimize your time spent on that.
Oh, okay. So that's very interesting. It's like initially, like you're saying, you are probably going to be very hands-on. So you need to put that in the back of your head. But as you understand the processes, you know where you can cut out all of the extra stuff. So as we keep the questions going, Samkelo also says, another question, I've heard that banks are not a fan of student accommodation. How would you go about financing such an investment? And I do know quite a few investors are always saying there is a bit of a hassle when it comes to student accommodation and banks financing that. So how did you manage to overcome that hurdle?
To be quite honest, I didn't have a hurdle with the student accommodation. My bond went through APSA, and APSA actually sent an inspector onto the property, and they had absolutely no problem with the fact that it was a student accommodation. So I think APSA is a great one to approach for that kind of deal. Otherwise, I suppose you could look at commercial funding. I never had to go down that route for student accommodation, but you could also speak to your bond originators and find out from them. And a bank can only say no. A bank can only say no. So then you go elsewhere. There's lots of different institutions and banks. People tend to think of banks as the four main banks: FNB, APSA. All the main banks, but there are a lot of banks. There's like 100 banks in South Africa. So, and if you pitch a deal to them, they will look at the deal based on the merit, and so they're more kind of entrepreneurial wise.
Okay, so that's actually great advice in terms of people not understanding that they are definitely different ways to finance. However, we always choose APSA as number one because they are our partners and they will be there tomorrow discussing how to unlock finance tomorrow at the Brighton Country Club. But we keep the questions going. Jacques has a question for us, and Jacques wants to know, he says, hi, Julia and Khali. Hi, Jacques. And he wants to know, thanks a lot for all the great advice. My question is, did you apply for a standard home loan for the student accommodation, or did you have to apply for a commercial loan? This is actually quite a good question.
Mine was a stock standard home loan. Stock standard.
Okay, and do you mind just kind of briefly giving us an understanding what a stock standard home loan is?
Okay, so it wasn't done through commercial. It was done. It was a normal home loan. Actually, me and my husband both applied for it, and he then signed surety for it. My husband signed surety for the loan.
Okay.
But if you've done your numbers correctly and all of that, it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, no, that's fantastic. I think people sometimes have the fear or the resistance because they're like, oh, if it's commercial, they're going to want a lot more things. And it's like, well, depending on how big the project is, you can actually still go, such as yourself, for a standard home loan that doesn't have all of the requirements that are typical in terms of commercial. However, Julia, thank you so much for that. And if you want to, ask questions to Julia or anything like that, you can contact us at support@SA Property Network. We can put you in contact with Julia as part of the team and part of the network. And as I said, this is what we do. We help people either start or grow their property journey. So if you know that you have a cottage or you have access to like a one-bedroom or even a bachelor apartment, and you're not entirely sure how to do it, or maybe a buy-to-let strategy isn't as fruitful for you anymore, we can definitely discuss other ways where all of your properties actually facilitate your lifestyle and what it is that you want to achieve. But as always, I want to say thank you so much, Julia. It's always a pleasure to have these discussions with you.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you. And thanks for having me on the show today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we say goodbye, as always, I'm just going to do another quick rundown of the events that are going to be happening this week and the upcoming weeks. Just to let you guys know, on the forefront, like I said, tomorrow, it's the big one. It's the last public event that we're having with APSA, and that is how to unlock finance via APSA and actually have the finance for more deals. That's happening at the Brighton Country Club. So you can get your tickets now. They are in the link in the chat box. After that, any part of the membership, foundation, intermediate, or professional, we will be seeing you at the coaching and legal support webinar. That's happening also on the 9th of November. And then investor deal night. Yes, so calling out all investors. If you would like some deals and you do not have the time to actually search for them yourselves, we are going to be bringing these deals to you. And that investor deal night is happening on the 14th of November. And also we're going to be having a mastermind. Now, this is only available to professional members. So all my professional members, please don't forget to register for the mastermind. And lastly, we are going to be unlocking your finance with Daniel Kazadi, and that's going to be happening on the 16th of November right here at our headquarters in Edenvale. And as always, I look forward to seeing you guys. Enter Investor of the Year Award. Yes, we officially have gone live, so please put in. It doesn't matter if your deal is brand spanking new and it's something as small as a little cottage, or you're huge and you have a giant portfolio, you're doing commercial, you're doing industrial, there is a section for you. So please don't forget to enter Investor of the Year Award. But as always, from me to you, I will see you next week.